Hey, Mike here from Scuderia Audio, and today we're going to go over some new cool products for these late model Ferraris, the 458, the 488, the F8, and you know, all the derivations, the Speciale, the Pista, Aperta, and so on and so forth. So first, a little bit of background. If you're going to install an aftermarket complete stereo system in one of these cars, the most difficult part by far is always the amplifier. Now, the most popular location for the amp these days is in the front trunk, right? You really don't want it taking up precious space in the cabin. Specifically, on the front wall of the tub, the wall that's closest to the front bumper. Because if you think about it, you know, let's say you're going to show the car to your buddy and you open up the lid, the trunk lid, and you look in there, you might not even notice the amplifier if you weren't looking for it. I mean, if you think about it, you'd have to bend way over and kind of look back down towards your knees in order to notice the amp. So that's always been the popular spot. But man, you got to remove all the rubber molding, you got to take the entire tub out, you have to run these long wires halfway through the car, try to find access through the firewall to the battery, and it really can be a nightmare. Well, over the course of a few installs, I've discovered that there's an area inside the cabin where you can't see that has more than enough room for a nice high-end aftermarket amp. And that location is right above the battery, the car battery. I mean, if you open the little door to get access to the battery, you know, on the passenger side floorboard, if you lay down and get your head way down there and next to the battery and kind of look up above the battery, there's this cavernous area right there that isn't being used for anything. So after some R&D, I came up with these AutoCAD designed laser cut stainless steel amplifier mounting shelf that fits above the battery. Now, there is an aluminum bar about, I don't know, yay long, with a hole in each end that kind of sort of acts as a brace to keep the battery, you know, still. And it sits there at a 45-degree angle. Well, so I've got these two tabs on each side of this shelf at the same 45-degree angle, and they have a slot on each side. Additionally, in that area on the firewall, there's a standoff with a hole in it. So all you do is you take the two bolts that are holding the bar out, remove the bar, set this in place, put a bolt and nut through this vertical tab, through the standoff that's welded to the firewall. Then you just take the bar and put it back into place right over this shelf. You take the same two bolts, you put them through the holes in the bar, you put them through the holes in the tabs, and you lock it down, and now you have this super secure shelf to mount your amplifier. Now, the really cool part about this is, you know, what are the two objects that need to interface with the amp? Well, it's the battery and the source, which in most cars is the radio. In this case, it's the infotainment box, which is mounted right behind the glove box. Well, once the amp is in this location, the battery is like, what, 3 inches away? And the infotainment box is like 5 inches away. It's like perfect. You can run really short, neat runs of wire, and everything is right there in a centralized location. I mean, install couldn't be easier. So this particular shelf is for the 458, 488, and the F8. This shelf is for the Speciale. Speciale is a little bit different, in the Aperta. And here is a Speciale shelf with a high-end Moscone amplifier mounted to it. I have these rib nuts are installed in here, so you don't even need to bother getting nuts and bolts and washers and all that. Since they're these PEM nuts down here, all you have to do is just set the amp on the shelf, get 4 bolts and run them through the holes right into the threads and the PEM nuts. Done. Additionally, I have developed some wiring harnesses that allow a totally 100% plug and play solution to wire this thing up. Now, again, a little bit of background. In the back of the infotainment box is a large plug or receptacle. Right? It looks something like this. On the 458 and the 488 and the F8, it looks almost like this, not exactly like this, but close. Now, there's a wiring harness that plugs into this receptacle that looks something like this. It's close, but not exactly like this, right? So it plugs in there, and these wires carry the sounds to all the different speakers in the car. Now, when you're hooking up an aftermarket amplifier, what you need to do is you need to intercept the signal as it's leaving the infotainment box. So 8 of the wires in this harness are the speaker wires. 4 wires for the front speaker, left positive, left negative, right positive, right negative, and then the other 4 for the rear speakers. Well, unfortunately, you have to cut these wires because you have to reroute the wires through the aftermarket amp, right? You would have to cut the wires, then you would have to take the wires that are on the source side and route them into the input section of the amp. The amp amplifies the signal, obviously. Then you take another set of wires going to the output section of the amp back to the sync side, or in other words, the side where the wires are going to the speakers. And that's basically how everybody hooks up these systems. Well, the problem is that a lot of people aren't too keen on cutting the wires in the stock harness of their $450,000 car. Well, on the Speciale, the receptacle on the back of its infotainment box looks exactly like this, because you can buy the Speciale connectors on the open market. I don't know why, but the connectors for the 458, 488, and F8 are classified as restricted products. I ran the part numbers by my Tyco Electronics rep, and she said, I wouldn't be able to give you a price on those connectors, let alone, having you acquire some. But we'll get back to that later. But on the Speciale, this is the connector that's coming out of the infotainment box, and this is the connector that's on the end of the large wiring harness that has the wires that are going to all the different speakers in the car. So since I can get a hold of these, I can make these custom harnesses, right? With this harness, I basically cut the speaker wires. I have to make this harness, but logically, I'm just cutting the speaker wires. See, these 8 wires coming out of here terminate in a standard electronic Molex plug, and the same 8 speaker wires on this side terminate into the corresponding Molex plug. In fact, if you were to plug these 2 plugs into each other, it would be totally stock, like nothing ever happened. But these are used, obviously, to reroute the signals through an aftermarket amplifier and back here. So what you do is, right, this is our simulated infotainment box. You just take the harness that comes with your kit, you plug it in, it's got this lever that locks down. Then you take your big wiring harness, like this, but it has this connector on it. You just plug it into the other side, and now you're good to go. In fact, the reason this is 100% plug and play is because in your kit I include some additional harnesses that allow you to hook everything up. So, right, you plug this in, the sounds are coming out the infotainment box, they're this far. So you take this harness that comes with your kit, you just plug it into here. Now you have your RCAs with the input signal. These are all clearly labeled. Okay, now you've got the signal to the input section of the amp. Now you take this harness that comes with your kit, you plug this into the output section of the amp, and you plug this on the other side of your custom harness. And now you have the amplified signals going all the way to the speakers. So all you have to do now is take care of the amp power, amp ground, and amp turn on. And I've got that covered in the kit. I've got the right wires with the right gauge, the right length, even the right ring terminals. Here's the power wire. You just put it there in the receptacle. You get a little Allen wrench and you cinch it down. And then this is the right length. You just put this ring terminal on the positive post on your battery. Here's the custom cable for the negative. You notice it has this monster ring terminal on here. Well, in these cars, by far the best place to ground the amplifier is there is a monster grounding post on the passenger side fender well. It's about 2 feet away from where you put your feet. It's almost to the passenger side door sill. So you just, again, plug this into the ground receptacle, cinch it down, take that big bolt out of the ground receptacle, put it through here, cinch it down, and now you've got a nice solid chassis ground. And the only thing that's left is the amp turn on. So I have this specialty wire with a specialty connector on this side that plugs into the amp, and there's another type of specialty connector on this side that plugs into a pin on one of the fuse boxes that's right near the glove box, on the side of the glove box, near the door hinge. And that's absolutely it. Now, let's go back to the 458, 488, and F8. Because remember, those connectors are restricted products. You can't get those. So unfortunately, okay, let's go back to this. Unfortunately, you're going to have to cut these wires. However, all is not lost because I try to make this as easy and painless and as professional as possible. So in the kit for those models, I include these mini harnesses. These are exactly like these mini harnesses on this big harness, right? So you cut the speaker wires somewhere along this harness, and then, well, first of all, you have to remove this adhesive-backed black cloth electrical tape. It's everywhere in these Ferraris. So in your kit, I'm providing a little roll of that exact same tape. So you just take this tape off, you cut the wires, and of course I include the right size shrink tubing in your kit. So all you have to do is just solder these wires onto these wires, and of course, you know, I give you a diagram, everything will be clearly labeled. I've done this so many times. For example, the front speaker wires is yellow goes to white, yellow with black stripe goes to white with black stripe, green goes to light gray, green with pink stripe goes to light gray with a black stripe, and then the other four are the rear speakers. So you solder these wires to the wires coming out of the infotainment side, then on the other side you solder the wires for this, and then you wrap it all back up in the exact same tape. It looks totally professional. And so I encourage everyone to do that part first, and then once you have these connected, the very next thing to do is plug these into each other and turn the stereo on. And once you see that the stereo works perfectly like it did before, trust me, at that moment you're going to feel a lot better, right? Because all you have to do is unplug these and then take these harnesses that come with the kit, and instead of plugging them into these ones, you plug them into these. It's the same thing. And then if you ever sell the car, all you have to do is unplug these harnesses and then just plug these back into each other. Done. The car's just bone stock again from a logical point of view. Okay, so I have my portable system all set up out at my dining room table, so we're going to take all this gear out there, we're going to hook it up, and we're going to crank some tunes. Okay, well, let's go play with the stereo. Okay, so we have our little portable system here. We have some Focal component speakers in these little bookshelf boxes. This enclosure is actually for Natalia, but that's okay. We have our little cheapy head unit, which is going to simulate the infotainment box. We have our simulated stock wiring harness, which I'll go into detail in a minute. 12-volt power supply, and our amplifier on our shelf. So give me a second. I'm going to refocus the camera a little closer to the electronics, and then we'll hook everything up. Okay, so we have our little head unit where the sound originates just like the infotainment box. Right? In this case, the sound comes out these wires in the back, through this harness, through these wires, and into this connector, which is exactly like the connector that's mounted in the back of the infotainment box. Right? So for all intents and purposes, this setup right here is an infotainment box. And then of course, this connector is plugged into here, and it has all these wires that are going out to all the different speakers in the car. Now in this case, I just took the wires for the front speakers, and they're connected to these quick connect connectors, and you know, they're hooked up to standard copper speaker wire that goes to these bookshelf speaker boxes. So for all intents and purposes, this is the car's stock harness. Okay? So the first thing we need to do is the first thing we need to do in the actual car, which is unplug the stock harness, then grab our new harness, plug him into the back of the infotainment box, push it in, lock him in, then plug the other side into the car's harness, push it in, lock him in. Okay, now remember we have our speaker wires here. So first we get our input harness, and remember the music comes out here, through here, and now the sound is this far. So we're going to connect this connector, and then now we have the sound coming into these RCAs. They're clearly marked. You just plug 1 into channel 1, 2 into channel 2, 3 into channel 3, and 4 into channel 4. So that takes care of the input side. Then we get our output harness, and we connect him from the output section of the amp back into the other side of our little mini speaker harness. Okay, so now we have the sound making the round trip through the amp out to all the speakers. Now, your output harness has this special connector with this real heavy gauge. Well, that's for the subwoofer, because the subwoofer takes a lot of power. So this is a special connector. Now your kit is going to come with a very long run of high-end subwoofer cable with the appropriate mating connector. And there'll be enough cable to run, you know, under your center console and back to the subwoofer on your firewall. So this right now this cable is connected to the subwoofer box. So we're going to plug that in. That takes care of the sub. So all that's left now is the power, ground, and amp turn on. So we'll start with the ground. We'll get our ground cable, connect him to the ground receptacle. We'll cinch him up using the Allen wrench that comes with your kit. Now, remember there's this big monster ring terminal on the end. So what I have is I have a test ring terminal connected to the negative post on the power supply. So I just have a nut and bolt. We're just going to bolt the two ring terminals together. That should be fine for this test. That should be fine. Then we get our power cable, plug him into power, cinch him down, and then I have another test ring terminal connected to 12 volts. We'll bolt those two ring terminals together. Right, this would go to the positive post on the battery. The other one, remember, goes to that big monster ground post on the fender well. Okay, so all that's left now is the amp turn on. So we plug that into the little remote. Okay, now I have a, now remember, this has a specialty connector that plugs onto a pin in the back of the fuse box near the door jamb on the passenger side. So I have a test wire that has a pin that simulates the pin that you're actually going to plug it into, so we just plug those two together. Okay, now we're going to plug the power supply into the wall. Give the system a few seconds, right? Remember, in your car, the amp is always going to have power and ground, and it has the amp turn on. The reason it's like that is because when you initially give the amplifier any power, it takes a few seconds for the capacitors to charge up inside the amplifier. So you're not going to get music for a few seconds. So that's why you always keep the amp hot, but then when you go to play music, the little turn-on wire gets energized and it flips a relay in there, and then the amp's always ready to go. You don't have to wait. So all we got to do is plug our little MP3 in here with our good old Scuderia audio theme song. I mean, all I got to do is turn up the volume to like 6 or 7, and the whole table just starts to shake. I mean, this subwoofer is pounding. Cool. Okay, well, that's about it. So I have kits ready for the Italia 458 Spider, 488 GTB, 488 Spider, Pista Spider, Speciale, Aperta, and as soon as I can get my hands on an SF90, we got him covered as well. Okay, well, have a great day!